I told myself I wasn't going to make this video. I think it's ridiculous to even have to give thought to this scenario. But here we are. And there are other outlets that have made videos about this, and there are other talking heads that have had takes on this. I'll get to all that in just a second. But listen, I'm not going to bury something really deep in the video. I'll just tell you straight up. Florida State is not getting left out of the college football playoff at 13-0 as the ACC champs. I don't care who you read, what you see, what they think, what you think, who you cheer for. It just doesn't matter. And I'm going on a rant about this for maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20. We'll see how long this ends up, but it's just not happening. It's just not based in reality. There's just no chance that that is what takes place here. I don't know why this narrative has started to form, but unfortunately, this narrative started to form even before JT went down with an unfortunate injury. Now, last week, again, and I'll get to this in a minute, I saw even some FSU outlets that started to talk about this and started to propagate this and spread their propaganda. And fortunately, very few people did end up seeing that because it was just ludicrous and stupid. But on Saturday morning, again, obviously before the JT injury, you had Kirk Herbstreit saying that maybe Texas or Alabama might jump over Florida State if they were 12-1. I don't know why that is something that entered into his mind. I kind of like Kirk. We've had him on the show here before, and he was very complimentary of Mike Norvell, the job he's doing, wanting to see Florida State get back to those days in the 90s when he loved covering the Seminoles. And so I don't know if that's just his way of trying to get engagement. I know College Game Day is failing and less people watch it today than really ever, even though college football numbers are going up the other way. People just don't really care about game day as much. But yeah, Kirk seemed like he thought that Texas should get in at 12-1. I'm really not sure why. I understand the Alabama win is a very impressive win, but Florida State has looked better than Texas this entire year. Texas continues to struggle week after week after week with teams like Kansas and others that just really aren't even that good. But for some reason, Florida State gets held to some kind of a different standard because they played a close rivalry game with Miami. This is a couple of days after the College Football Playoff Committee chair told you we didn't really put much stock into Florida State playing Miami closely. We didn't even really care about that. We thought they dominated the game, and Miami kind of had a lucky touchdown late that made it look closer than it was. But we thought Florida State was the much better team. Now, again, I do think that College Game Day is an entertainment program, and they've gotten away from a lot of the true football analysis that you used to know them for. I mean, I thought David Pollack was one of the best parts of that show, and got rid of him to bring on more, entertainment. McAfee's not great by any means. He's very entertaining, but he doesn't break down football like Pollack did. And so they've gotten away from that, and they really want to try their very best to prey on your emotions and try and get you riled up, which they've done a good job of. Here I am making a video about it. Now, the Noles did drop to 5th in the E poll, but to think that the games that will be played this weekend, like Michigan and Ohio State and Alabama, Auburn maybe, and some other games as well, won't have an impact there is pretty ludicrous. Florida State, if they beat Florida, which we'll talk about all week long, we've got some interesting stuff coming out on Max Brown and some other angles that we want to look at this game from. But if Ohio State or Michigan, whoever wins that game, if Florida State beats Florida, they're jumping that Big Ten team. I don't care what you think. It doesn't matter. Florida State is going to jump that team in both the AP, the coaches, and the college football rankings that come out, especially if they go on the road and do it in a hostile environment without their most important player. So I'm not really worried about dropping to 5th in the AP poll. A lot of people speculated that that would happen whether JT got hurt or not. You think about the fact that Washington did go on the road and play a top 10 opponent and beat them. Not convincingly, but did win as an underdog. That's impressive. And that deserves a little bit of a bump. It's razor thin. It's very close. Florida State's going to have a chance for something like that coming up very soon. But I don't know that I'm super worried about dropping to 5th there. I don't think it had a ton to do with JT's injury. I think it had a lot to do with who Washington beat. You've got idiots like Dan Wolken writing articles about how the College Football Playoff Committee is going to have a tough choice when it gets to Florida State being 13-0 and considering them for the playoff or not. No, it's not going to be a tough choice. The point of the playoff, merit matters and winning matters and how you play matters. But if we're going to just take the top 4 teams from a power rating standpoint or a Vegas odds total standpoint, then we literally should have just started this season in week 1 with a 4-team playoff of Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, and Ohio State. We should have just started there. And that should have been our playoff. We could have had week 1 playoff, week 2, the winners of those 2 games, and saved a ton of time. But that's not how this sport works. You don't just take the top 4 teams that would be favored in Vegas and make your playoff based on that. Now, does the way that someone plays down the stretch, does that impact things? Yeah. Does the way that a team looks, the game control that screwed us in 2014, does that matter? Yeah. If a team is close and you've got 2 12-0 teams or 2 13-0 teams and one team is blowing everybody out and the other team is just barely scraping by people, a la 2014 Florida State, could you maybe put one team ahead of the other because of that? Yes. But if a team loses games or loses a game, you cannot jump them over teams that are undefeated, especially when their resumes are comparable, when their strength of record is comparable, when their talent is comparable, when they're both champions of their conference. 13-0 is still and will always be better than 12-1. I don't care. I don't care if you think that the SEC is better one year or not. Which this year, I don't know that it is. They were terrible out of conference. I know that the Big 12, the idea that Texas could jump Florida State, a Big 12 champion this year, that's absurd. Listen, other outlets last week started to bring up this notion as well, and their point was stupid, and I unfortunately watched their video on Florida State possibly getting left out, and that was before Kirk or any of these idiots said anything, and obviously well before the JT injury. We'll talk about that in just a moment, but if you are coming out to Florida this week, I'll take my rant down and be nice to you guys for just a minute. Make sure that you come tailgate with us. It's Noles Gators 2023. .eventbrite.com. The link will be in the description. Get your tailgate tickets. We're 5 days away from partying in the swamp and then kicking their tail. Let's get after it. But their whole baseline was, hey, there's a premise for this. Florida State got dropped in 2014. We might get dropped again. There's a couple of different factors between 2014 and now, and let's talk about them. One, Florida State was hated. Florida State was hated in 2014. A lot of it had to do with the Jameis Winston stuff that was going on. A lot of it had to do with the fact that they had won so many games in a row. A lot of it had to do with the fact that they were being measured not against the rest of college football, but against themselves from the prior year. You see, that's why there are no repeat Heisman winners, because you're not measured against the rest of college football. You're measured against your elite Heisman season from the year before, and it's very hard to live up and do that twice. Somebody in the comments will bring up Archie. I know there's been one, but come on. That's why we judge teams harder. When they've won the first year, we judge them much, much more harder the next year. Florida State was hated. They were judged for how they played in 2013, and media wanted something different. And they were barely scraping by teams. Barely scraped by Louisville. Barely scraped by Boston College. Barely scraped by Miami, barely scraped by Notre Dame, barely scraped by Clemson, barely scraped by Florida, barely scraped by Georgia Tech that year. So I kind of get it. Florida State wasn't some dominant team. Now they found a way to win, but I kind of understand that. They were scraping by, just barely getting by teams. That's not been this Florida State. This Florida State team blew out LSU. This Florida State team blew out Duke. This Florida State team blew out every ACC opponent they played, minus Boston College and Miami. And the committee already told you that they didn't think that Miami game was anything but domination. BC, so you're being judged for the BC game? Like all of a sudden the Michigan-Maryland game doesn't matter. Like all of a sudden the Ohio State-Rutgers game doesn't matter. Like all of a sudden Texas struggling with Kansas and everybody else doesn't matter. Get out of my face with that. I just don't buy it. Josh Pate has had some good points on this, and he said similar things to what I'm saying. And I believe him. It is ludicrous. It should not be entertained. You shouldn't be arguing with your rivals on social media about where you might end up. You think they're going to put a 13-0 Florida State team in the Orange Bowl over a bunch of teams with one loss? No chance. Now, what's the doomsday scenario for Florida State? I don't think there is one. I think it's they got to lose one of their two games. I cannot envision a scenario where they're leaving a 13-0 Florida State out. I've tried to think of one. Like, oh, man, what would be the worst thing that could happen to Florida State? And here's what it is. I'll tell you. Here's what I do believe it is. I think the worst thing would potentially be, because you know that the ESPN has a love affair, maybe is the nice way to say it, with the SEC. I think that's the possible trouble spot. I think you've got your Big Ten champion in at 13-0. I think we all agree with that. I think if Washington goes 13-0, you've got them in. I don't necessarily think they do. I think Oregon probably gets them. But say Washington goes 13-0. Let's remove that for all sake of arguments. I think they're in. I don't really worry about Texas very much. The idea that, if Alabama wins, they should be in. And then if Texas wins, they beat Alabama, so they should be in. So a week 3 result matters. But I don't think Texas is in. I'm not worried about that. But if Alabama beats Georgia, I do worry about the love affair that ESPN has with the SEC and them possibly putting Georgia and Alabama in, saying, hey, we think Georgia's a better team than Florida State. We think Alabama's a hotter team than Florida State, and so we'll put both of them in and we'll leave Florida State out. To me, that's probably the worst-case scenario. But I don't know. I still don't really worry about that. We're going to hold BC against Florida State, but we're not going to hold USF against Alabama. I just don't know that I buy it that much. Now, I think in that situation, I think Bama's in for winning the SEC, but I think Georgia's out. But I will say to give some credit to this theory out there, which is more so just me bashing the conference because that's the angle I want to take here. I don't really worry about it as much as from like what will really happen. But ESPN doesn't fight for the ACC; they fight for the SEC. But ESPN makes a mockery of the ACC. You want to know why we want out of this conference? Because our TV partner, the people who are paying us pennies on the dollar compared to what everybody else is getting, makes a mockery of the ACC and Florida State for 5 minutes on College Game Day on Saturday morning and crafts the narrative. Don't tell me the ESPN, a paid financial partner of the college football playoff, is not painting a narrative around what they think the playoffs should start to look like. Now, the argument of, Florida State would just go in with a backup and just get killed. Possibly. But I've seen a lot of starters go in and get killed too. I've seen a lot of starters go in to the playoff and get absolutely demolished. So if that's our standard, then maybe don't put anybody in. Let's just vote on a champion. Let's not even play games anymore. Let's just vote on paper. Oh, this is your roster at the beginning of the year? Okay, well, Alabama assembled the best roster. They're the champion. All right, Georgia's was second best. They're our second place team this year. Okay, look, Ohio State was third best. They're our third place team. Why even play any games? Games don't matter if that's the case. The idea that they would get left out is ludicrous. And I appreciate people like Josh Pate, J.D. Pickell calling this a team sport, pointing that out. That, Jordan being left out, Jordan not being there is hurtful. It is. Does it make Florida State a worse team? I don't want to call Florida State a worse team today, but certainly they've lost an advantage. I'm being a homer by not just saying it, but Florida State's not as good today as they were with Jordan Travis, a top 5 quarterback in the sport. Well, I don't think I'm being a hater by saying it. It hurts to say it a little bit. I get it. But to think they'd get left out, to think that Florida State could earn their way into the playoff, and then the committee would say, you know what, you earned your way, but your best player's not in, so we're going to take away what the 84 other guys on the field earned because one guy got hurt. You may have earned your way in, but one guy got hurt, so we're going to take away what the other 84 earned. That's insanity to me. And if that happens, You thought FSU Twitter was bad in 2014. Elon will be banning all of y'all. And I'll probably be the first one to go. At the end of the day, I think what ESPN knows and what they want is they want the attention. And we're giving it to them here. But I'm not linking anything. I'm not showing any of their propaganda. I'm not telling you to go watch any of their crap. Maybe stick with the people who actually talk ball, like JD Pickell at On3. I know Pate gets a lot of hate for his stuff. Pate does a good job of this big picture stuff. His game stuff is whatever to me. I don't necessarily watch every game breakdown, but I think his big picture stuff like this is great. His stuff on Michigan's been great. His stuff on Florida State making the playoffs has been great. But maybe just leave the entertainment side of things to the entertainment people. And if you want to talk about football, maybe leave ESPN out of it. Absolutely ludicrous to think that they would leave us out. It's not happening. Now, Florida State at this point has to go take care of business, and it's going to be tough to do. I think they're going to be a favorite in both games. I'm not worried about that. But you're still going on the road and playing a rival. You're still playing a good Louisville team that's beaten some teams that you've beaten by more. It's played really, really well. Played Miami pretty close. I think they're pretty comparable with Miami. You should beat them. You should beat them by about 10. But we'll see. We'll see how that all goes down. Excited to see what Tate brings this week. Excited to see what Tate does next week. And then hopefully what he does in the playoff. Because if Florida State wins the next 2 games, they are going to the playoff. I started the video with that. Hopefully you made it to this point and didn't tune me out once I kind of gave away the punchline. But I started the video with we're going to the playoff if we go 2-0 in the next 2 games. And I'm going to end the video with if we win the next 2 games, we're going to the college football playoff.